Joining us, MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter Ali Vitale in Chappaqua, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, and host of the Tara Palmieri podcast and author of the Red Letter on Substack, Tara Palmieri. All right, so Ali, let me play what Comer said just a few moments ago regarding some testimony from Bill Clinton.
I want to make a statement because they'll probably not mention this when they come out here. Ranking Member Garcia asked President Clinton, quote, should President Trump be called to answer questions from this committee? And President Clinton said, that's for you to decide. And the president went on to say that the president, Trump, has never said anything to me to make me think he was involved.
Okay, so Ali, that was Comer's characterization of what President Clinton said. Congressman Garcia just was speaking a moment ago, and he said that's not quite accurate.
That's exactly right. And I think there's two things that struck me, because this was also the exchange that I think I pulled out as the most important and substantively impactful of what we just heard from lawmakers as they gaggled with us and then went into a deposition break. To me, it says two things. First is that Democrats keep trying to respect this idea that they are not supposed to talk about the substance of what's happening in these depositions, like truly specifics about what's happening in these depositions, until the transcript and video are released. What we've seen now is Republicans in Comer doing a pretty good job of trying to set the narrative of what is said inside. And the reason that I think what Comer said there is important and also gives us some insight into how he might be thinking about the future of this investigation is that they are trying to use Bill Clinton as a way to rebut claims from Democrats and others who say, OK, if you got a former president in Bill Clinton, why are you not asking President Trump, who is mentioned hundreds of times in the files, potentially more than any other person in there, or one of the top mentioned people in the files? And Comer, by trying to use Clinton to say, well, Clinton says he never had any reason to think that Trump was involved with Epstein, they're basically trying to cut that line of inquiry off at the pass. Obviously, Garcia and Democrats were not going to just let that go. They very much want to use the fact that Clinton is here before the committee as leverage for why Trump himself should be called before the committee. But to me, it tells me that Comer is aware of the door that he may have opened by getting the Clintons, giving the conservative red meat of these favorite villains for Republicans, putting them back in the deposition spotlight, that he's also now aware of the door that it opens for people to say, OK, if you've got Clinton, why are you not asking for Trump? Or even more than that, if the committee wants to ask spouses who don't have insight into their husband's actions, for example, as Hillary Clinton didn't into Bill, then why are you not also asking Melania Trump, who, by the way, is actually pictured in some of the Epstein files and has at least one correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell, right? So it opens up this sticky line of partisan questioning, and that's what I saw in Comer there, trying to rebut that.
Or frankly, Marla Maples, who is said to have found Epstein to be off and odd. Why would she? And he was at her wedding as well, and at Melania Trump's wedding to Donald Trump. So if the spouses are now fair game, what about those two women? I want to get to that in a moment because, Tara, you've got some interesting reporting regarding somebody else linked to Melania Trump and Epstein, and I do want to drill into that. But first, let's talk a little bit more about Bill Clinton. He had an opening statement today that laid out, I guess, the parameters of what he thinks he had to offer the committee. And he says, I'm going to paraphrase it, I didn't see anything, I didn't know anything, I didn't do anything wrong.
I think that's a pretty good distillation of what both Bill and Hillary Clinton have each said previously, Katie, and not just said it. They swore to it in declarations that they offered to the committee mid-month last month in lieu of testimony. And he said in his declaration, I'm going to read to you, to state plainly, I had no personal knowledge of Mr. Jeffrey Epstein or Ms. Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal activities, including those to which Mr. Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida in 2008, those for which he was investigated and charged in New York in 2019, and those for which Ms. Maxwell was found guilty in 2021. However, I do think that there were some legitimate questions to be asked of President Clinton, notwithstanding that statement. And those include questions not limited to, but those include questions about his 2002 travel with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. They traveled together on multiple occasions that year, including sort of an infamous trip to Africa on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, where many other notable people were present. One of the things that I think we need to better understand about that trip, as an emergency room physician who accompanied them on the trip to ensure that Bill Clinton, as the former president, was adequately taken care of. He said, look, everybody else on the trip, and he said this in a statement to the FBI, everybody else on the trip had a designated purpose or a reason to be there. You could explain why they were on that plane. And yet, there were 4 women there whose presence I could not explain. They were all in their early 20s, appeared to be 20 to 22. One was described to me as a ballerina, another a former model. But everybody else was there for philanthropic reasons, because they had policy expertise. And of course, Epstein was there because he contributed the plane. That ER doctor honed in on something that I think is legitimate to ask Bill Clinton about. What did you think those 4 girls were doing on the plane? And should you have asked more questions or disassociated from Jeffrey Epstein as a result of that?
I'm sorry, I misspoke a moment ago. He was not at Melania's wedding to Donald Trump. My bad on that, but he was at Marla Maples' wedding. But back to Bill Clinton and the women on the plane. Okay, he's got 4 young women on the plane. They don't appear to be underage. And maybe he thought this guy is a playboy, fine. But Bill Clinton was around Jeffrey Epstein more than that. And
yes,
Jeffrey Epstein had a certain reputation, even in 2002 and before, about liking, we saw the birthday book, about liking young girls.
Well, let's talk about the infamous New York Magazine profile. Again, if you want to draw some connective tissue about Clinton and Trump, both of them were aware of that reputation. How do we know? Because in 2002, when New York Magazine wrote one of the first sort of now infamous profiles of Jeffrey Epstein, there was that quote from Trump where he says, it's been said that Epstein likes beautiful women as much as I do. And then he flags that he likes them on the younger side. So that was part of Epstein's reputation that was trailing him around Palm Beach and certainly New York society. At the time, Hillary Clinton was obviously a senator from New York. The Clintons had already set up base in Chappaqua. Even if that was not yet his national reputation, anybody who operated in the New York circles in which the Clintons, as a former president and first lady, were then active, would have sort of known the scuttlebutt around him.
Okay. Does he appear in the files post Epstein conviction?
I have not seen any showing that Bill Clinton himself, in relation to an ongoing relationship with Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, appears in the files after that period of time. However, I want to flag, we are all aware of the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell attended Chelsea Clinton's 2010 wedding after Epstein's original conviction and after he was done serving his time as the guest of a Clinton friend named Ted Waite. We understand from both Clintons that she was there solely in the capacity as Ted Waite's +1, essentially. But again, there is no indication that Epstein was maintaining a correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm sorry, that Epstein was maintaining a correspondence with Bill Clinton, or that he was maintaining a correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell independently after that time.
All right, let's talk about the slippery slope here and the precedent being set. Democrats say, Tara, that the Republicans are calling in a former president. They're calling in his spouse, who says she didn't even know Jeffrey Epstein. Aren't you setting a precedent, they say, to allow us to interview Donald Trump, to allow us to interview potentially his spouses? You've done some reporting about another person that links Melania Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. We've seen her in photos, obviously. We keep showing them. We've also seen that correspondence between her and Ghislaine Maxwell, which was short and innocuous, at least on the outside. Who is this guy that you're writing about, and what link does he have?
So this is Antoine Berglas. He was a huge fashion photographer in the 1990s. He photographed Cindy Crawford, Stephanie Seymour, Claudia Schiffer, all of the biggest models. And in fact, he propelled Melania Trump's career. He is the reason that she became famous. He did that famous GQ spread of her naked in Trump's plane. He also did a few other photographs of her Maxim Golf, where she's again naked, just covered in golf balls. They did about 12 sessions together, and he is responsible for her fame. And he was, found through her modeling agent, and this is around the same time that she was getting a visa. Now, at the same time, he maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein from 2012 to 2017. That's after his conviction. He was photographing Epstein's girlfriends and their friends. In some of the emails, it suggests that they were nude. He sent nude photos to Jeffrey Epstein he sent many photos to Jeffrey Epstein. They worked together on shoots a number of times. And then there's a really concerning email that was forwarded to Jeffrey Epstein that was sent by him about this drug scopolamine that takes away free will. It's basically a zombie drug, almost like leaves a person basically incapacitated. He said he doesn't remember the context of that drug, and that he said that they never did anything together with it. But there are a number of very concerning, interactions, especially the fact that he was still working for Jeffrey Epstein, after his conviction in 2008. And so, this is someone who made Melania Trump's career. And while it doesn't suggest that, Melania did anything wrong, it does show one degree of separation between the world, Melania, and the world that made her, this elite modeling world, and Jeffrey Epstein, a world that he easily exploited through visas. I mean, actually, this photographer, Julian Fairglass, helped Epstein's girlfriend, Karina Shuliak, get a visa. That's how close they appeared to be in these emails. So he's a reoccurring character. He shows up almost 600 times in the Epstein files, and he just so happens to be the man who made Melania.